Susie,
Rob,
so you're going to tell me about some head-butting dinosaurs today, is that right?
I am Rob. I am. Very interesting paper that came out just a week ago or so ago.
Excellent.
Uh,
So, have you had any occasions where you've butted heads with a person or object?
well, I never like to argue with people, as you
You're
know.
famous
I'm
for that.
very
You're famous for that.
famously unargumentative. I do. I have some paleontologists that I occasionally metaphorically butt heads with.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Over time, some of them are have worked on stegosaurs.
Yeah. They
Some
know
of
who they
them
are. They know
they
who
know
they
who
are.
they are. Some of them are in the UK. Some of them
Yeah.
are not in the UK. Some of them are in America. How about you?
Right.
Have
Well,
you got
yes,
any
I mean,
nemesis?
nemesis, I guess I wouldn't ever describe myself having as a paleontological nemesis, at least not one that I wouldn't go and have a drink in the pub with. I could think of a
Oh.
few, but I think butting heads at the moment is just trying to get my kids to put their coat on when we're leaving the house. This has been the source of arguments with each of them multiple times over the last 72 hours to the point that I'm losing my hair, which might give me a nice shiny dome in all, much like
Ah, there you go.
Pachycephalosaurs. That wasn't intentional. That was Pachycephalosaurs. So I'm looking forward to you telling me about Pachycephalosaurs. So, Susie, what have you been up to this week?
What have I been up to this week? Oh, had I been to Utah when I talked to you last?
Yeah, yes, you'd been with
I
the
had.
Birmingham students, yeah.
Oh well, I've mainly just been jet lagged. I've basically done, just
Still
slept
catching
at the
up.
wrong time. That's what I've done
Yeah.
this week. What have you done?
Not a lot. It's been the big start of term around here, so we've had
Oh
absolute wave
yeah.
upon wave of humans hitting the building and the campus. I always get freaked out. Every year it happens, and every year I'm like, where are all these people coming from? That's why I'm here. That's what the university is for. It's for these thousands of students.
Do they look
So,
younger? Do they look younger every year?
no, no, I'm quite resigned to the fact that they stay the same age, and I'm the one aging and decaying away into a fossilized corpse as the. Oh God. The side note, I wasn't even going to mention this, but seeing as you mentioned it, I was giving my lecture and I'd forgotten I'd included some memes in there. So it was my lecture on EDR and things, and no, it was Tinaphores. I had some Tinaphore memes in there. And I
Uniform
tried to hide
memes.
them. I tried to hide them because I was embarrassed because these memes were out of date. But when the students caught wind of me trying to hide the memes, they got incensed. They were like, "No, you must show us the memes." And then and now they've insisted there has to be more memes. But I'm a 40-something year old man making memes. It's too cringe. I can't deal with it anymore. My meme game is not fresh.
No, no,
No.
no.
Okay. Oh, in other news, Susie, I want to thank out the people of the Well-Read Naturalist. They compile like book recommendations and podcasts and things like that. They gave us a particular shout out of their recommended podcast. So anyway, let's talk about pachycephalosaurs. So what's the paper you want to tell me about this week, Susie?
Yeah, so this paper is called A Domed Pachycephalosaur from the Early Cretaceous of Mongolia. And it was published on the 17th of September in Nature. So just 3 weeks ago from today, the day that we're recording this. And the authors are Sogbata Chinzorig and a team of sort of his international colleagues with senior author Lindsay Zano from the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. And this is mainly, I think, so this is a Nature paper. I think the main thing about this is it's like a super cool specimen. It's a rich,
Yeah, it is.
really,
Yeah.
really, really nice specimen. Yeah. So, well, in this paper, Chinzorg and colleagues have named this new pachycephalosaur, which is called Zavacephale rinpoche or rinpoche, I'm not sure. And it's from the early Cretaceous of Mongolia. So, pachycephalosaurs, what are they? Well, they are ornithischian dinosaurs, so they're bird-hipped dinosaurs, and they're characterized by the possession of a dome on their head, which is why we started to talk about headbutting and domes, and also your bald head or your soon-to-be bald head because of your children. Now, the dome, so they've got this kind of domed cranium, and then the dome is surrounded by a series of kind of knobbles and nodes. And there's been a great deal of debate over the function of this structure. Some people have suggested that it could be related to headbutting. Instead of headbutting, like head on head butting, maybe like flank butting, so that they, butted flanks with each other. But other people have suggested that maybe it's a display structure. And there's been quite a lot of kind of innovative or thoughtful ways of trying to assess what the function of the domes might have been. I actually used to use in my teaching back when I used to teach people a really nice study that I liked where they looked at loads of bighorn sheep It was a guy called Joe, I think Joseph Peterson was the guy, and he looked at a load of bighorn sheep, and bighorn sheep are these sheep. Guess what they've got? They've got bighorns. The sheep
Big
in
horns, yeah,
America
big
with
horns.
bighorns, yeah. And they are, I saw some last week actually. They're quite elusive, but we saw quite a lot anyway. And they headbutt as part of their kind of, like mating behavior. They're trying to compete for mates. So they headbutt each other, and this leaves damage to their skulls, obviously, occasionally. And so he did a survey where he looked at kind of damage on the skulls of sheep, bighorn sheep, and then tried to see whether he could see similar sorts of damage on Pachycephalosaur skulls. I thought that was quite a cool way of looking at it. I think that he found a similar kind of proportion of damage on Pachycephalosaur domes. I thought that was quite interesting. But anyway, I think it's fair to say that the jury is still out on what really the function of these domes are.
Hmm.
Now, the thing about pachycephalosaurs is that there's hardly any of them. They're really, really rare. And they're, in fact, almost entirely known from domes, just domes. And it's
Just the
quite
domes. I
difficult.
guess that makes sense, right? Because taphonomically they're going to be really, really heavily. Because I mean, these domes, right? They're not just for looking at. They have really, really thick bone, right?
They're really thick bone, yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
they're a thickened. The skull roof is really thick,
Hmm.
and people have cut them up. They've done FEA analyses on these domes to see what kind of forces they could absorb and things like that.
Hmm.
And yeah, but their fossil record is relatively crap. We've had many silly conversations over lunch here about whether Pachycephalosaurs had a growth stage that was just the dome. And then
Just the
suddenly
dome.
it's as a joke, was not a real theory, Rob.
Well, I come from the world of fish where that might actually be a possibility. I was thinking, how would this thing walk about? I mean, I should have realized it was a joke. What is this just stone with a squishy bit hanging out,
Yeah,
like a
yeah.
brain and nervous system?
Just the dome, and then it just sort of, I don't know, pops into life from just the
Yeah.
dome. But anyway, so they're sort of, their fossil record is almost entirely a series of
Hmm.
small rounded dome-like blobs. But they're only known from the late Cretaceous or prior to this specimen,
Yeah.
which I think is one of the exciting things about the specimen. I actually saw them present a paper on this at Society of Vertebrate Paleontology annual meeting a couple of years ago, and it was really exciting because it was early Cretaceous. So the oldest, by far the oldest Pachycephalosaur in fossil records. So they're only known prior to this discovery from the late Cretaceous of Asia and North America. They're most generally thought to be most closely related to the horned and frilled dinosaurs, things like Triceratops, the
Hmm.
ceratopsians. But there is still a little bit of debate about that because there's a group of dinosaurs called heterodontosaurids, which are known. They have a long fossil record right the way from the very earliest Jurassic or possibly even the latest Triassic, right the way, some of the earliest ornithischian dinosaurs known, right the way through to at least the early Cretaceous. And they're characterized by heterodont dentition. So this means like their teeth, they've got different shaped teeth. So particularly they have things like incisors in their upper jaws and lower jaws. And pachycephalosaurs have this too. And so some people have resolved heterodontosaurids as kind of basal pachycephalosaurs or somewhere
Hmm.
related to the Pachycephalosaur ceratopsian lineage. So there's a little bit of a question still about,
Hmm.
what exactly they're most closely related to, primarily because we have this very, very rare, very poor fossil record. Now, a big problem with understanding their kind of, their taxonomy, really, how many different species there are, is that, aside from the fact they are primarily just known from these kind of domes, when we do have more material, what we see is that there are a couple of taxa of genera that are known from quite a lot of material. One's called Stegosaurus, for example, and they have actually got a growth series. So they've got kind of small individuals to slightly
Hmm.
larger individuals. And what that shows is that the dome actually develops. It gets more dome-like as they grow older. And so people have kind of suggested that this is obviously a secondary sexual characteristic. It's related to probably some sort of display or fighting behavior for females or something like that.
Hmm.
And but also some of the earliest pachycephalosaurs in the fossil record might not have a dome yet because the dome hasn't evolved yet.
Hmm.
So there's been a lot of debate over whether you've got like flat-headed forms that are different species, or the flat-headed forms are just juveniles of already known
Hmm.
species. And probably the most famous example of this is a dinosaur called Dracorex,
Oh, right,
which
yeah.
was named by, I think it was actually named by Bob Backer.
Hmm.
who was a relatively controversial paleontologist. Well, kind of he was well known in the sort of 70s and 80s, and he wrote a book called The Dinosaur Heresies. It was a very famous book at the time anyway. Lots of people got very excited about it, and he's since gone a bit nuts. I think it's fair to say he's got a massive beard. And anyway, he named this dinosaur. I think it's called Dracorex hogwartsia, if I remember correctly, and it is an amazing looking thing. But some people think it's actually just a juvenile of Pachycephalosaurus, which is one of the best known Pachycephalosaurs. So anyway, there's a lot of unknowns about this group of dinosaurs because their fossil record is so fragmentary.
Can I ask a
Um,
question at this point? Is this a good time to ask a question?
go
So
nuts.
with all these ontogenetic sequences, or sort of growth sequences, I should say, when we talk about ontogenetic sequence, we're talking about the idea that we might have some juveniles, some larval forms, some adults, subadults, whatever.
Not so much larval forms for
Well, no,
dinosaurs.
larva. Okay, again, from the world of fish or insects, that might make sense. A larval pachycephalosaur, I don't know what that looks like. Well, that's the
It's
dome.
just the dome. It's
That's
just the
just the
dome.
dome, obviously. Yeah. So I guess the question I was going to ask was dimorphism. So if we've got this idea that this is a behavior where we see maybe male to male competition, as is the bighorn sheep, that's what they do, or goats, they're another one that do this, or cows can sometimes do this. Giraffes even have male on male, violence to they're whacking each other's necks. Do you in the fossil record? I mean, it's really hard in the fossil record to ever see dimorphism because you often just end up going, oh, this is a species with a big head, this is a species with a small head, two different species. But has any been interpretations of male or female or sexual dimorphism in these pachycephalosaurs?
No, and this is a massive problem. I mean, it ultimately it boils down to sample size, doesn't it? In
Yes.
order to tell whether we've got sexual dimorphs of the same species or whether we've got two different species, what we really need is tons and tons and tons and tons of specimens,
Yeah.
all from the same place at the same time.
Yeah.
And we simply don't have that. And in fact, not only do we not have that for pachycephalosaurs, we really don't have that for any ornithischian dinosaurs at all.
Hmm.
And or indeed, I think any dinosaur, it would be fair to say. So, lots of the ornithischian dinosaurs, these bird-hipped dinosaurs, are characterized by these very kind of, I always call them bizarre structures. You think about plates on stegosaurs, horns and frills on ceratopsians, armor on ankylosaurs. We've got all these weird structures. And it's really, people have occasionally said, well, I think this is the female of one and this is the male of another, or this is a juvenile of one or this is the adult of the same taxon. Very, very, very difficult to actually test that in the fossil record. And there's been some cool work done on hadrosaurs. So hadrosaurs are duck-billed dinosaurs. They were like the cows of the Cretaceous. And they
Hmm.
have cranial structures which are like kind of crests and things like that. And they, back in the 70s, very influential paleontologist called Peter Dodson did a really cool study where he looked at kind of very simply the morphometrics of the crest. So back in 1970s morphometrics. So, taking linear
Lots
measurements
lots of
of
measurements of the shapes
lots
of
of
the things. Yeah.
measurements to try and clarify the shape of the skull or represent the
Hmm.
shape of the skull and the crest. And what he decided, and there had been like 12 different species named from this one place. And what he showed was that actually there were things which were, probably were small and had a distinct shape crest, and they were clearly the juveniles. And then
Hmm.
there were kind of two lineages. And he interpreted within each of those two lineages, they represented two genera. And then within each of those, there were males and females, which had slightly different shaped crests. And so that was like, seemed like a really good way of testing it. But then just in sort of the 2010s, colleagues in Canada at the Canadian Museum of Nature, Jordan Mallon, he actually then tried to look at where exactly the alleged males and females of these different genera had been found. And what he found was that the males and females didn't overlap in time.
Ouch.
Out. So now with much better mapping and much more detailed mapping, what he was able to show was actually rather than being males and females of the same genus, they were actually probably an anagenically evolving lineage whose
Nice.
crests changed slightly over time
Well, that's
in
also
shape.
interesting.
I think
That's
super
still really
cool.
cool.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's a super, super cool study. I think it's really
Yeah.
interesting. But anyway, even within the cows of the Cretaceous, so a huge,
Hmm.
incredible fossil record we have of these animals, we have still been unable to identify sexual dimorphism. So within
Hmm.
Pachycephalosaurs, where we've basically got, pretty much one or two of each taxa, there's just no hope at all. It's very, very
Hmm.
difficult. And it's certainly possible, I think, that, if we've got two Pachycephalosaurs that were co-occurring in the same formation, as we
Hmm.
do with, say, something like Dracorex and Pachycephalosaurus, that they could well either be ontogenetic morphs or they could be sexual dimorphs, but we simply don't know.
Hmm. I mean, I should stop asking you questions because we really need to get back to. That's my fault for interjecting. Although it's interesting as it was, I want to know more about Zavacephale.
Okay.
Zavacephale?
So you don't want to know about hadrosaur crest, is what you're saying. Well, I think this is really interesting. Anyway, all right. Zaracephale.
I do want to know about Hadrosaur, but I also want to know about
Zavacephale.
Zava.
The point is that this fossil is particularly significant, not just because it is the earliest Pachycephalosaur in the fossil record from the early Cretaceous. It also preserves a beautiful skull, but a beautiful postcranial skeleton as well. So
Yeah.
the rest of the skeleton, it's not totally complete, but you've got the dome, the rest of the skull bones, and you've got the skeleton. And we don't have that many Pachycephalosaurs where we have that. There's maybe 3 or 4. So that's exciting. So the rocks that it's from aren't particularly well dated, but they're from the latest part of the early Cretaceous, so the Albian or Aptian.
Mhm.
And it's tiny actually. It's less than 10 kilos.
Oh,
So
I didn't notice that.
yeah, they've got a figure. You see figure one? Have you got it in front
Yeah.
of you? It's
Oh,
tall.
that's interesting. I hadn't noticed the size thing. I was too busy looking at. So this preservation is amazing, right? The skull is got loads of fine detail. It's articulated. We've got most cranial, post-cranial things, and as you say, you named Ankylosaur on one rib, right? This is not to be rude, but you did, and it will come across as some excellent material later on. And this one is amazing material, lovely stuff. But I'd never noticed the size. That also raises implications about its biology, right? If you're less than 10 kilograms. I'm just trying to think about what your average goat weighs. A lot more than that. If you're having a sort of headbutting thing, these things are going to like completely bounce off each other, one assumes, if they're headbutting. Or does this just underscore that they're not headbutting? Or is it a juvenile? I mean,
Well, we'll come to
we'll come
that.
to that. We'll come to that
We'll
later on.
come
Sorry,
to that.
Susie.
We'll come to
Right,
that.
okay. I've got to calm down.
But while you're talking about how beautiful the specimen is, did you see how it was found? Have you looked at the extended data? So as Nature papers, this is in Nature. So Nature papers
Hmm.
very short, but they have these extended data figures that they often put at the end,
Hmm.
where you can kind of put in kind of other information, extra information. And
Yeah.
one of their extended data figures is actually where the specimen was found. And I mean, Rob, you have to put this on.
Jesus.
Can you see it sticking out? So
Yeah.
it's super
Oh,
cool, right?
it's
You've
just
got
sat there, just on the
go
cliff.
on, explain what we're looking at. Explain what we're
Okay,
looking at.
okay. So this is a Mongolian hillside, right? So this looks very typical. I mean, I've been to Mongolia, I've done field work there. I've spent hours scrolling up and down, looking at the hillside, looking for tiny little scraps of bone or anything that gives us a little hint of what's going on. In this particular instance, I could stand from about 10 meters away, just point and go, there it is.
Yeah.
Because there's the dome skull just sat on the rock. I mean, the picture does have a big red arrow pointing to it, but even
You didn't
without
need it, did
the
it?
didn't need it. That's amazing. It's
I mean,
just
it's
completely
just
exposed.
the dome is just sticking out like
Yeah.
towards the photographer. It's
It's like almost
hilarious.
as if like the kid's cartoon idea of what fossil finding a fossil was like. You're just scrolling along and there's the skull. And specifically the dome. You can even tell it was a Pachycephalosaur from 10 meters away. There it is. I see the dome sticking
Well,
out of the rock.
and also because it's the dome, so the top of the skull is pointing out of the rock. They must have been like, oh, you know what's going to be under the rest of that rock, under the rest of that hillside? It's going to be the rest of the skeleton, and of course it
Yeah.
was. So they actually, they look at there's hardly any overburden. Must have been lovely to
That's
excavate.
amazing. Just
Yeah.
sit there in the sun, just gently brushing that away and chipping that away.
Yeah, just
Excellent
brushing
stuff.
that mudstone. Yeah, very nice too. Anyway, yeah, super cool. Interestingly, it preserves a gastric mill, which is a
Yes.
series of
Yes.
stomach stones, and these are a sort of a mass of stones that are sitting in its stomach region. And it's long been speculated that herbivorous dinosaurs may well have ingested stomach stones in the way that birds do today. So you might see
Hmm.
kind of birds going along and pecking at stones to help them grind vegetation. Vegetation is really hard to digest, isn't it? So grind vegetation in their stomachs. And it does appear that this dinosaur was doing exactly that. So it has this gastric mill in its stomach. And it has this extensive network of tendons around its tail, which is a
Mm.
pachycephalosaur feature. So other pachycephalosaurs are known to have this. So it's a tendon basket. And these are actually, we see ossified tendons quite a lot in ornithischian dinosaurs, but this particular arrangement is quite unique. Now, they decided that they wanted to understand, because it was so tiny, as did you, Rob, in fact, how old this animal was. But
Hmm.
one of the things that people have done a lot in the past is they've cut it, because primarily they've got domes and not much else. They've cut up the domes to try and figure out
Hmm.
how old the animal is. But a great thing about this specimen is they were able to cut up the dome and a leg bone. And normally, if we want to know how old a specimen is, we cut up the leg bone. And we can do this because when animals are fast growing, when they're juveniles, remember that dinosaurs would have hatched from, relatively small eggs. Even the giant sauropods hatched from eggs the size of a melon, right? So they had to grow incredibly rapidly in the early stages of their lives, presumably to like not get eaten, but also to reach a kind of adult size. So what we see generally in dinosaurs is we see very fast growth early on in their development, and then as they reach a kind of adult stage and become what we call skeletally mature,
Mhm.
their growth slows and they start to. And the way we can tell this is by like kind of the chaoticness of the bone. People have looked at domes lots in the past to try and figure out how old pachycephalosaurs are, but have rarely been able to do this with postcranial bones. So normally we would look at the leg bones typically to tell that.
Mhm.
They know that in pachycephalosaurs, as these things get older, their void space at the dome decreases. And so this specimen doesn't have very much void space in its dome. Looks like it's quite a mature dome. However, when they cut open its limb bones, they discovered that the skeleton is actually an immature individual. It's still growing
Mhm.
really fast. So it hasn't,
Yeah.
its growth hasn't slowed yet. And this is kind of cool because it suggests that you've got the development of the dome is kind of occurring ahead of the development of the skeleton. And
Mhm.
because we think the dome is a secondary sexual characteristic, is a characteristic that develops through ontogeny and probably only develops at the onset of sexual maturity, or when the animal starts to need to start mating,
Mhm.
then this suggests that obviously sexual maturity was reached prior to skeletal maturity in these dinosaurs. And actually
Mhm.
that's probably true of quite a lot of dinosaurs. But this is actually, we see the same pattern in Stegosaurus plates. So we know that Stegosaurus plates look like, if you just look at the plate, it makes the individual look older than it actually is. So
Mhm.
it seems that some of these kind of bizarre structures in these sorts of dinosaurs, that's the thing they do.
Can I ask a naive question, which is perhaps showing my lack of understanding about these things? I know that mammals, generally grow to an adult size and they stop growing, but I was under the impression, perhaps misleadingly, that things like crocodiles can just keep on going and going and going until they stop. Is there a limit? Do you stop growing?
Yeah, they so I think the thing with mammals, and I'm definitely not a mammal person, but we have that thing where we ossify the ends of our limb bones separately,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah.
so that babies don't have ossified the ends of the limb bones; they're kind of a separate
Hmm.
ossification, and then they fuse.
Hmm.
And of course, once that limb bone fuses, that's your maximum adult size in
Yeah,
terms of your height. And reptiles don't do that. So reptiles
yeah,
just have, the bone can carry on, the cartilage
yeah,
is at the end of the bone, and it can carry on being added to. But growth substantially slows. And what
yeah.
you, I think, tend to happen is that the bone might become a bit more robust. It might get more
Hmm.
chunky, but there was probably, they probably did reach a kind of adult height and not really
Yeah.
grow much more than that upwards. Like with all of us, Rob, we tend to grow outwards instead of upwards
Are you
once we
talking
reach.
specifically about my stomach here? Because, the laptop has to sit a few extra centimeters away from me now, but that's
Oh,
that's Pidley spread. I wanted to
well,
ask another question about histology. So I was a bit curious about what you said. I mean, I, I wasn't sure. With a skull like that, surely you don't cut it up because it's so beautiful and pristine. But looking at the methods again, it looks like they definitely did cut up a tibia, but I think they might have used virtual sectioning for the dome with
so
CT scans. So, they did a
yeah.
scan and looked at some X-rays and then did that, I think,
Yes,
is my
I think that
interpretation of
that's
it.
typically what they are sort of doing with these sorts, because they're interested very much in void space.
Yeah.
But of course, actually CT scanning, and particularly synchrotron scanning, which we've talked
Mm,
about quite a lot in the past, haven't we?
mhm.
Is we have very high resolution CT
Yeah.
scanning using a
Yeah.
particle accelerator, is actually now getting to the point where you can actually do histology with through scanning, and we
Yeah.
won't need to cut up bones anymore, which is super cool actually, isn't it? Because it means that many more specimens will be available for us to look at these kinds of things
Indeed.
than we could do previously. But yeah,
Especially a
I'd be.
beautiful one like this. I wouldn't want to chop the skull of this one up. It would be sad.
No, I mean it's also a holotype, isn't it? So a holotype is
Yeah.
the specimen which holds the name. And certainly if you want to cut up a holotype here at the Natural History Museum, you have to have some really good, yeah, really strong reasons why you're going to do that.
Yeah.
They tend to be really reluctant to let you chop up
Yeah.
holotypes.
So we've got a tiny pachycephalosaur, less than 10 kilograms. It's still growing. It's a juvenile, but it's got a big, thick, heavy dome.
Hmm.
Lovely. And it's also
Yeah,
much, much earlier than the others.
yeah.
So what next? What do we do with that?
Well, I mean, I guess some of the implications of this is that it really does help us to understand kind of the evolution of the dome. in Pachycephalosaurs because they've done a phylogenetic analysis of this. So they've worked out where it sits in Pachycephalosaur evolutionary history. And not unsurprisingly, it comes out as one of the earliest diverging, one of the most basal
Hmm.
primitive
Hmm.
Pachycephalosaurs. However, there is one that comes out more basal, and it's one called Wananosaurus. And
Hmm.
this one is from the very latest Cretaceous, and it's always been quite a controversial taxon because it has a bit of a thick skull roof relative to other dinosaurs, but it doesn't have a dome, doesn't have a properly developed dome. So people have used this to suggest that the first Pachycephalosaurs didn't have a dome,
Hmm.
and that the dome developed through Pachycephalosaur evolution, and actually that development of the dome occurred in a much more restricted group of Pachycephalosaurs. But this is problematic, of course, because Wananosaurus may well also be a juvenile. So it might not have a dome because it's a juvenile, not because
Oh
it's
Lord.
adult. And we don't have an adult form of it. So potentially these kind of, and you know, Rob, because you've worked on this, haven't you, that how juvenile characters can
Yeah.
actually cause things to form more basally in a
Yeah.
phylogeny.
Indeed. If I did it's really difficult because if you're doing a phylogeny, really what you want is a nice complete adult that's preserved very well. But if you do a phylogeny on birds, I don't know why I'm picking on birds necessarily, or lizards or snakes or whatever I'm choosing, or fish, if I put in six adults and one of them I don't have an adult of, I only put in a juvenile, that's going to massively distort things. Or if I put in one that's very incomplete because it's got less information, that could distort your phylogeny. You, and it's really important for these ones because we've got a very good reason to think that the ontogenetic sequence is showing how the morphology of these things massively changes through time. If I've got, when I say time, I mean the lifespan of the organism. If I've got a crocodile, my juvenile crocodile looks roughly the same as an adult crocodile. If I've got a juvenile frog, it looks very different from an adult frog, right? I can't put in a tadpole into my analysis. It'll end up looking completely different in terms of its evolutionary relationships.
But we also have this sort of confounding factor about how, that was sort of the traditional thing that people learned about anatomy, wasn't it? That ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, right?
Yeah.
So that it may well be true that early pachycephalosaurs didn't have a dome. Um,
Hmm.
and the fact that they don't have a dome ontogenetically is also true. Like both of those things could be true.
Hmm.
And so this is why pachycephalosaurs have been so difficult. But the great thing about Zavacephale, of course, is that it's very primitive and it's very
Hmm.
early. And it does have a dome. It has a fully developed dome. So,
Yeah.
I think this possibly puts to bed that discussion, really. Certainly, we don't see, and I guess we would expect to see some sort of transitional, kind of something from a sort of stem marginocephalian, so something that's, some small two-legged dinosaur that has a slightly
Hmm.
thickened skull but doesn't have full pachycephalosaur features.
Yeah.
We would expect there to be that, yeah, the dome didn't just pop out of nowhere, did it? It must have evolved gradually over time. But
Do you want a problematic side note?
yeah, let's do that.
Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. So this is a very classic idea from Ernst Haeckel of what, the 1700s, was it 1800s? No, 1800s. That was his whole theory. Also a mad racist. He had this idea that, I mean, he did these lovely pictures. So he had lots of rights-free pictures of all the different, well, he was a very good developmental biologist as well. But he also had the idea that different races were different levels of perfection. Like the European race was the
Wow.
perfect pinnacle of evolution as opposed to some of the other non-European races. So
Wow.
as we now know, we can absolutely debunk that scientifically and ethically. So anyway, I don't know why I'm interjecting that into your middle of your really nice conclusion of Pachycephalosaurs or ontogenetic sequences, which was completely unnecessary. Sorry, Susie, as you were saying.
No, it's always good to know about these problematic people in our field in the past and in the
Yeah.
present. Yeah. So I think, I think that's probably my take home is that, this is it potentially helps us to sort of, solve this issue around
Hmm.
whether one Anasaurus, this very unusual thing, is actually a juvenile or whether it's
Hmm.
really a transitional fossil. And I think it's probably hasn't got a dome because it's a juvenile. I think other carefully helps us to probably establish that may well be
Yeah.
more true.
Nice. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed because it absolutely includes all sorts of interesting ideas for me. I mean, I'm not massively into dinosaurs, as you well know, but the idea that you're trying to reconstruct evolutionary relationships based on things that have very different sequences of growth and adult stages and juveniles look very different. And also, this implies massive different growth ranges. And also, I guess this implies something about the behavior. If it was just a sexual characteristic, you wouldn't imagine it to be in the early juvenile. I mean, if you're a juvenile, you don't need to necessarily go and do the headbutting necessarily. But
Well, it's
yeah,
not necessarily an early juvenile, is it? I mean, it has some growth rings, which are a bit like tree
mhm.
rings. So we know it's not like a hatchling or anything,
No.
but it could suggest that they had, some sort of kind of slightly elevated sexual maturity, or they reached sexual maturity quite early,
Hmm.
before they'd reached skeletal maturity. But yeah, I mean, it could also suggest that the dome isn't a secondary sexual characteristic at all.
Yeah.
I don't know what else
So
it would be though.
no. So as a sort of concluding side note, I guess it's worth chatting about Mongolia a bit. It's a really fascinating place for paleontology. So you and I have both been out there, I think for different reasons. You were on a National Geographic thing, weren't you?
It was New Scientist, but yeah,
New
yeah.
Scientist, sorry.
I was but mainly just I was the paid entertainment. I was mainly cracking jokes
The paid
afterwards.
entertainment. So you were so it was, well, I guess I've been out into the Silurian and Devonian in the far west trying to dig up some fossils,
Ah,
trying to find some fossil fish with Martin Brazo and Anna Yov. Hello, those guys listening. By the way, we keep saying certain people aren't listening, and then they get in contact and say, actually, I am listening. Even Phil Donahue said that he was listening. So now I have to,
no.
no,
Hi,
indeed.
Phil.
So indeed. So now I have to rethink about what I said about conodonts, about whether well, anyway, getting on track with the Mongolia. Yeah, so we drove for like 7 days out west to go to the Silurian and Devonian rocks. And it's a really interesting place to do fieldwork. It's completely unlike the UK, right? We're a massively overpopulated island. Go to that place, and it's just like no people. I got a bit freaked out on occasion. I was like, we haven't seen anyone in like 3 days.
It's
I'm getting a bit weirded out by this.
it's amazing,
And
isn't it?
it is
Amazing
amazing.
place.
And this skull just poking out of the cliff. It's kind of surprising, but not surprising in some respects, because it's so underexplored in comparison to like Western Europe or the United States or even places like South Africa. Lots of places have been gone over with the fine tooth comb. Mongolia, like the first field day they took us there, and we've been out there 2 field seasons. The first time we got there with our local collaborator Minjin, who sadly passed, poor Minjin. We went out to and I found he took us out to the Silurian Valley, and I found a lungfish tooth plate, and I was like, oh, that's weird. I don't know what this is doing in the Silurian. This is like the first day we were there. They just taken us to the wrong valley just by mistake because there's no landmarks, whatever. Yeah, it was Devonian, but it was just like this wasn't even on the agenda. Like, oh, we're in a different valley. This is just a different stuff. There's so much yet to be found out there, but it's also a bit of a challenging place to do field work, I guess, because it is. In some places it's very easy because there's so much space and so much exposure, but in some places it's hard because there's no way you're going to work out there without working with Mongolians, and nor should you really. But they have the knowledge, they know what they're doing. It's a complicated language. They have very strict fossil laws as well. I was surprised that they were able to export these specimens. So this is a specimen that's going to stay in Mongolia. It's given an MDC number, the Mongolian Dinosaur Center, I think. But they were able to get it out to do some preparation in Carolina, I think it was,
Yeah.
before sending it back.
Well,
We have. Mhm,
Lindsay Zano, who's the senior author on this study, has a very long-term collaboration with with the Mongolians.
mhm.
They have National Geographic funding, I think, to do these projects, and
Yeah,
she goes out every year. And Sogbata Chinzorig, the lead author of this study, he's Mongolian, but he is based in North Carolina. So
yeah.
I don't know whether he's permanently employed there, but he has some sort of fellowship or some sort of position,
Hmm.
and he spends time there. So they have I guess, exchange of not just fossils, but also, in intellect, if you like,
Yeah, yeah,
with
yeah.
Mongolians coming to North Carolina and them going to Mongolia. And so I think this allows them to do this sort of work where they're able to loan fossils to do the work and to do, because CT scanning, I
Hmm.
imagine, very difficult to come by in Mongolia, whereas
Hmm.
they can do it very easily in the States. And I no doubt this specimen, if it hasn't already gone back, will be going back next year
Hmm.
or whatever.
Oh, I had a couple of things I wanted to talk to you about. I don't know if it's too late now. The Tibetan names. Oh yeah, there was a little thing in the methods that said after the data collection, the field locality was remediated to preserve the
Mm.
natural heritage of Mongolia. What do you think that means? How do they remediate a site after you've done excavation?
I have no idea what remediate means in this context.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. But I mean, presumably what they're saying is we're not publishing it because we don't want people to nick stuff.
Yeah.
That's usually what that means. But
They
I don't know
weren't they
what
weren't very specific about
remediated
the field
means.
location. The field
No.
location was a bit vague with good reason, I guess, because
Well,
they
with
don't
good
want loads
reason.
of
Yeah,
legions to people to swamp down and destroy it. But
exactly.
also with Mongolia, I guess you wouldn't driving around, you'd probably find it if you didn't remediate the site. you'd probably see it pretty easily from the road. Well, I
Yeah.
say the roadside. There's no roads. You just,
Well,
from all the valleys.
but fossil poaching is there's a huge issue in fossil
Yeah,
poaching in
yeah,
Mongolia. So yeah.
yeah. Well, I thanks Susie for bringing this one to the story to me and to the Fossil Files listeners. I enjoyed it. What's our take-home message, do you think?
I mean, it's just a really nice specimen, isn't it? It's just I mean that's what it is. It's just a
It's
really
just
cool
a
specimen.
lovely dinosaur. Well, I don't think it's just nice specimen. It also tells a nice story, right? We
It
know
tells a
about
nice story.
how did the
It's
Pachycephalosaurs get its
got
dome?
its own.
We're now getting a bit more information about that.
Yeah, and again, it's a thing that I bang on about all the time. But, what it shows us is that this really, this sort of basic field research and taxonomic research absolutely underpins everything else in our discipline. And,
Hmm.
we can't do anything. We can't do anything macroevolutionary. We can't do anything. We can't understand, the evolution of life without this, people like Lindsay and Sobata's team who are going out exploring, finding new specimens, and doing the kind of really basic research that
Hmm.
absolutely is foundational for our discipline.
Well, it does help if you're sort of just wandering along the hillside. You can trip over a dome just sticking out of the rock. You can't necessarily guarantee that, but you won't find it if you don't go. That's the point, right?
I can firmly say that I found nothing like this while I was in Mongolia. I mean, there were you couldn't move for dinosaur fossils, but they were mainly very small fragments of
Yeah.
bone or bits of theropod that nobody cares about. So yeah.
Oh, the fishy bits that we found were really hard to work with. They were sort of fairly fissile. They were like crumbling away in your hands when you
Uh,
tried to put them out, which was a bit stressful. But we managed to get it out, and it had some new interesting histology that helped us understanding about fish evolution. But that's a story for another time.
yeah, nice.
All right. Thanks, Fossil Files fans, and thanks, Susie. The Fossil Files was presented by Robert Sansom and Susanna Maidment. You can find more information, including links to the original papers that were discussed, at fossils.libsyn.com, and you can contact us at fossilfiles.pod@gmail.com.